Hello, welcome to this Lunch and Learn presentation. My name's Tom Reynolds. I'm the Commercial and Public Affairs Director at the British Ceramic Confederation. I'm just going to spend the next 20 to 25 minutes or so talking through some preparations for no deal, if that is indeed the outcome of the Article 50 negotiations, which are of course ongoing and at quite a crucial stage at the moment. This is just going to run through some things that you might expect at the border on March the 30th if there is no deal. So we're going to cover things such as considerations around imports and exports, some regulatory considerations, and also some personal travel issues right at the very end of the presentation. So without any further ado, let's just perhaps set the scene for this discussion. So to set the scene, one of the things which the government have been repeating through all of their documentation on this no deal scenario, whether it's the partnership pack, which this presentation is largely based on, or indeed the technical notice or the media appearances which you'll see ministers make in the run-up to the parliamentary vote around this, is that they don't want or expect a no-deal scenario. This is worst-case scenario planning, but they actually expect a withdrawal agreement and a substantial deal in the medium term for our relationship with the European Union. So, having said that, we have to be cognizant of the political situation, which is extremely volatile at the moment and unpredictable, and it really is prudent for businesses to start thinking about their no-deal planning. The odds, I think it's fair to say, of a no-deal situation coming about are much higher than they were 18 months ago when all of this kicked off and the Article 50 process kicked off. So it's now something which businesses should be giving lots and lots of thought. Something else which is recognised throughout the government's documents is that the stability of the no-deal scenario partly depends on how the EU react. Government are trying to supply businesses with continuity as far as is possible through their no-deal planning and the technical notices, but how it actually works in practice will depend on how the EU reacts too. One of the biggest areas of concern, of course, is around customs. And the upshot of the no-deal planning by government is that the same rules as apply for imports and exports from outside of the European Union and to the rest of the world will now apply for our exports and imports to and from the European Union. So what that means in practice is that you'll be required to complete import declarations on any goods that you're bringing into the United Kingdom from the EU, and alongside that you'll need to supply a safety and security declaration, or at least your carrier or haulier will need to do so, and also if you're exporting to the European Union, you'll have to provide an export declaration as the goods leave the United Kingdom bound for the EU. And to do that, you'll need to have an economic operator registration and identification number, and the government will be publishing some more information on how you obtain one of these EORI numbers later this year. You'll need to ensure that your contracts and the international terms and conditions of service which are contained within your contracts reflect that you are now an exporter. Of course, if you've only been exporting to the European Union up to now, effectively you've been operating in one single market. So you may need to update your contracts accordingly. And you need to consider how you're going to make the required declarations. If you've got in-house capability and the expertise to do this within your business, great. You might need to put some more capacity there. Some people are considering using customs brokers, their freight forwarders, or their logistics providers to make these declarations. Check with them that they've got the capacity. You need to start having those conversations now, but come up with a really detailed plan on how you will make the declarations that will be required in the event of no deal. There are lots of concerns at the moment around company capability to do this. The number of customs declarations that will be required in the event of a no-deal Brexit are, by an order of magnitude far greater than are currently required. And the National Audit Office have expressed some major concerns about the capacity of the system and HMRC's ability to handle this greater number of declarations. So there are concerns all round, and BCC is using its offices and its routes into government to attempt to influence on that too, along with our partners in CBI, EEF and so on. So tariffs are another concern for goods entering the European Union. Along with the declarations that we've just talked about, customs checks and formalities will need to be carried out to ensure compliance with EU regulation. And of course, any duties will need to be paid. The EU will require payment of customs duty at the rate of most favoured nation, which you can find in the Common Customs Tariff, or indeed on the WTO's database of tariffs. And in the event of no deal, this is what's commonly referred to as trading on WTO terms. It's the tariff rate which countries have to offer all other WTO members unless there is a free trade agreement. So this is what we'd be referring to in a no-deal scenario. For goods entering the UK from the EU, the UK's most favoured nation duties will need to be paid by the importer, and these duty rates will be published on gov.uk. So on VAT, another thorny issue, and we'll start with VAT for importing. The government wants to keep the VAT system as close to that which currently operates. In the event of no deal, the HMRC will introduce postponed accounting for import VAT on goods brought into the UK. And this is in response to some major concerns raised across industry about the impact of new VAT regime in terms of cash flow. So this is something where government has listened to industry, and they've come up with a solution of basically UK companies being able to account for their import VAT on your VAT return rather than paying when the goods arrive in the UK. All goods entering the UK as parcels will be liable for VAT, and up to a value of £135, so that might be of relevance to some parts of machinery, for instance, or if you've got one or two special products that you need a component for. There'll be a solution for collection of that VAT from overseas business, which will be technology based. The UK will stop being part of the EU-wide VAT IT systems, such as the system for checking VAT numbers, which you may be using as part of your due diligence with supply chain. This is something which you'll need to consider kind of how you're going to operate going forward. So VAT for exporting. You'll be able to continue to zero rate your VAT for sales of any goods going to EU businesses, but you're going to, much like when you sell to businesses outside of the European Union, require evidence that the goods have left the UK. If you're selling directly to consumers, on the other hand, the current distance selling rules will no longer apply, so the EU will charge import VAT and customs duties on that good when it arrives at the border. Typically that will be absorbed by your customers. It's advisable to check the non-EU import VAT rules within the countries that you are exporting to. Trade remedies is clearly an area which has got the Confederation very animated since the referendum. We have 2 trade remedy measures covering imports of tiles and tableware from China, and it's something that's very important to many of our members. The government intends to establish a new trade remedies authority and a trade remedies system alongside it, which will operate from March 2019, when the UK leaves the European Union. In the event of no deal, the government intends to maintain the trade remedies which it says matters to the UK, and it conducted a call for evidence in earlier in the autumn, which it gathered evidence about standing and the UK production in areas where there were existing anti-dumping measures and other trade remedies. And for tiles and tableware, the provisional finding of that call for evidence is that they should be maintained. And about a third of all of the trade remedies measures the government has said should be maintained. The others will just fall away. Any new complaints to try and instigate new trade remedies will have to be made to the new Trade Remedies Authority, rather than is currently the case, of course, as a member of the European Union, when complaints are made to the Commission. So, on intellectual property rights, IP rights allow holders to control the distribution of the product which they've got their IP rights protected under, until they have had the ability to place it on the European market. After that point, once they have sold the product and placed it on the European market, those rights are exhausted. In the event of a no deal, the intention of the government is to continue to recognise that scheme of intellectual property right exhaustion within the EEA. So what this does is allow imports of like products from elsewhere once those rights have been exhausted. The government, in terms of a lasting approach, that is certainly the temporary intention in the event of no deal. But for a long-term approach, the government is conducting some research into how it wants to go about IP right exhaustion. So moving on then to some regulation. Goods which are currently regulated under the so-called new approach. These are the raft of EU regulations from around the last 10 to 15 years, which require a harmonised approach across all member states to regulation. So an example affecting our sector would be the construction products regulation. These new approaches require a demonstration of compliance by following certain harmonised standards. Conformity must then be shown through a manner of different ways, either self-declaration, CE marking, or in the case of the CPR, third-party verifications through a notified body, so an authorised testing house effectively. In the event of a no deal, for a time-limited period, goods that meet EU requirements will be able to continue to be circulated on the UK market. There will be a new database of approved bodies, and this is what the UK government is deciding to call its equivalent of notified bodies. which will be able to test for conformity with UK law and UK regulation. And the UK will also be establishing a conformity mark, its equivalent of the CE mark for goods. Assessments will be carried out by UK bodies to strictly show conformity with UK law. They will no longer be recognised to show conformity with EU regulation if you're selling your products within the EEA. So you really need to speak to your testing house now. They may well be putting measures in place to ensure ongoing recognition of the tests which they carry out, but you need to speak to them. Certainly we have spoken to a major testing house within the ceramics sector that's used by a lot of our members, and they are putting measures in place, but you need that assurance. So for goods that aren't regulated by the new approach to harmonised regulation, the principle of mutual recognition of different member states' regulations applies. This is where, say, a good complies with a UK regulation or a French regulation or a German regulation. It can then circulate within the whole EEA market based on that conformity. In the event of no deal, non-harmonised goods for sale within the UK will need to ensure compliance with UK regulation. It won't be good enough to conform with national regulations in other EU member states. Of course, we'll no longer be an EU member state. Something which is concerning quite a lot of our members if they export lots, particularly to markets such as South Korea and Canada, is that they're currently exporting under a preference. So this is an EU free trade agreement with those countries. So in Canada, it's the CETA agreement, for instance, which gets rid of the tariffs that you'd otherwise pay to import your product into Canada. What the government is seeking to do is to replicate those EU third country free trade agreements to become UK Canada, UK South Korea agreements. If they are able to do that, there may be some changes in the event of no deal. For instance, the way that you prove that the product is of a UK origin in order to gain that preference. The government's going to publish a report on any such changes before FTAs are ratified by the UK Parliament and the Parliament in the third country. Should say, just to manage expectations here, if there are no agreements to replicate those free trade agreements, it's not an easy process, although the government is very confident about its ability to do this, then the trade will revert to that WTO non-preferential trading terms. So these will be the MFN tariffs of those trading partners, and you can find out what those tariff rates are by looking at the WTO tariff database. A couple of slides now on exporting and importing chemicals, which is of interest to some of our material suppliers, and also will become of interest to a much broader group of our members who are downstream users. In the event of no deal, the UK government intends to establish effectively a UK reach, really a direct comparison of the EU reach system. And instead of being administered by ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency, it will be administered by the UK's current reach competent authority, which is the Health and Safety Executive, HSE. If you are a registrant under the EU REACH system, that will mean that you are no longer able to sell your goods into the EEA unless you transfer your registration to an EU-based organisation. That might be quite easy if you are part of an international group, less so if you are based just here in the UK. So you need to start thinking about that process now. If you manufacture in the UK for the UK market, or indeed if you import from an EEA country, or actually further afield, you're going to face new registration requirements under the UK REACH system. Downstream users of authorisations, you'll not be able to rely on the decisions which have been addressed to companies based within the EU 27 in the other EU states. You're going to have to think about applying for authorisations through the new UK REACH system. And the government is attempting to make this as smooth a transition in the event of no deal as possible. So the new UK REACH will carry across any registrations which are held by UK-based companies. But following over that grandfathering, those registrants will have to be required to provide some basic information on their registration to the HSE within 60 days. For new registrants, so people importing or manufacturing who aren't currently registered, they will be required to provide some notification and basic information about the chemicals they're seeking to register within 180 days. All companies that currently hold authorization for continued use of chemicals on the authorization list within EU REACH will carry across their authorizations to the new UK system. For everyone that's going to be affected by this, you'll need to open a account on the new UK REACH IT system, which is currently undergoing trials, and the government will make an announcement once that is ready to apply for an account. And then beyond beyond the no deal, the two regulatory regimes will run separately. So if you're looking to supply your product into the EEA, you'll need to make sure that you're a registrant or a part of a consortia registering within the EEA. And if you're looking to supply the UK market, either as a UK manufacturer or a supplier to the UK industry, then you'll need to make sure that you've got registration in the UK REACH. So for some of our members in the technical ceramics area who are producing products which may be for both a civilian or military use, the so-called dual use items, export licensing is a concern. The EU export control regulations have been brought into UK law now by the EU Withdrawal Act, which passed through Parliament earlier this year. In terms of the changes which you can expect, if you're exporting these products to the EU, you'll need to get a license, and further guidance is going to be issued by the UK government on how you go about doing that. We hope well in advance of March the 29th, so keep your eyes peeled on gov.uk for announcements in that area. But also any licenses to export from the EU to other countries that were issued by UK authorities will no longer apply, and similarly any licenses issued by EU 27 authorities to export dual use items from the UK will no longer apply either. Final topic to cover quickly. lots of businesses require travelling around Europe to be able to go about sales and just generally doing business. At the moment, holders of a UK passport can travel throughout the Schengen area in the EEA with right up until their passport expires. In a no-deal situation, that will change. You will need to have at least 6 months left on your passport, as if travelling to other areas of the world. It is possible that you'll need even more than 6 months remaining on your passport. If you had your passport issued for more than 10 years, perhaps because of an early renewal, you will need the equivalent time that it was issued early, extra on top of the 6 months before your passport expires. So you and your staff, if they're travelling for work, need to be mindful of this in the event of no deal. So just a final slide covering sources of further info on this, because we do recognise that everyone is on their journey of preparation for no deal, and you have to balance the resource that you throw at this with the chance that we're going to get a good deal. Although I think more and more it's looking likely that a no deal is something that is worthwhile investing some time in. So some good sources of information on the gov.uk website. There are some step-by-step guides on importing from countries outside the European Union, and indeed for exporting to countries outside of the European Union. These are worth looking at because in the event of no deal, these of course will become relevant for trading with the European Union. So it contains some good information. If you're not already exporting or importing from the rest of the world, check those out, and they will give you an insight into how you need to be thinking about trade with the EU too. Also, the technical notices which were published in October go into quite a granular level all of the different things which you might need to consider in the event of no deal. They're a quite useful source of information. In terms of the stuff that we talked about earlier on in the webinar around customs and export documentation, really recommend speaking to your local Chamber of Commerce. BCC's got a really good relationship with our local Chamber of Commerce here in North Staffordshire, who are a real mine of information. So it's worth opening up a dialogue with those service providers. And finally, do sign up for the British Ceramic Confederation's bi-weekly newsletter, and we will be using that to keep information coming out as we collate it from government and pass our comment on it every now and again. So do sign up for that, and we hope it's useful. And of course, we are always here. If you are a BCC member, get in touch with us. We'll try to provide you with the information that you require, or at least point you in the right direction.